The desert stretched wide beneath the fading glow of the sun, its golden light painting the horizon in hues of fire and amber. The air was still, heavy with silence, as if the land itself held its breath for what was about to unfold. Out here, every shadow carried a secret, and every whisper of wind seemed to echo with untold stories of love, loyalty, and betrayal. It was in this vast wilderness that two souls found themselves standing at the edge of destiny, torn between fear and longing, between doubt and devotion. She stood there, her eyes filled with a mixture of desperation and hope, her voice trembling as she asked the question her heart had carried for so long. "Tell me it's true, that you love me." The words left her lips like a fragile prayer, one that could shatter with the weight of silence. Her chest rose and fell as she waited, her gaze locked on his, as though searching for the truth in the depths of his dark eyes. He was an Apache warrior, tall, strong, and proud. Yet in that moment, the strength that made him feared by many softened into something tender, almost vulnerable. His people lived by honor, by unbreakable ties to the earth and the spirits, but love was a force even greater than war, even more dangerous than the sharpest blade. He looked at her, the corners of his lips curving into a faint smile, one that carried both warmth and sorrow. And then, in a voice steady and unshaken, he answered, more than life itself. The words fell heavy, powerful enough to silence the world around them. But with love, especially a love forbidden by those around them, came danger. For theirs was not a simple bond. It was a love caught between two worlds that did not wish to meet. She came from a place of walls and rules, where hearts were caged by expectations and duty. He came from open skies and endless plains, where freedom was as natural as breath. Together, they were a spark in dry grass, beautiful, bright, but always at risk of burning everything in their path. Her heart raced as she searched his face, wondering if she could believe him, if love alone was enough to hold them together against the storm that was surely waiting beyond the horizon. The truth of his devotion was clear in his eyes, but doubt crept into her mind like a thief in the night. She knew that words spoken in quiet moments were not always enough to protect against the roar of the world outside. Still, there was something undeniable between them, something that drew her closer, even when every warning told her to turn away. Perhaps it was the way he carried himself, not as someone who belonged to her world, but as someone who stood above fear. Or perhaps it was the gentleness hidden beneath his strength, the rare softness he revealed only to her. Whatever it was, it made her feel alive in a way she had never known, as if love itself could defy the rules of time and place. Yet love has always demanded sacrifice, and deep inside she wondered who would pay the price. Would it be her, leaving behind the life she knew to follow him into the wild unknown? Or would it be him, caught between loyalty to his people and devotion to her? The desert winds carried no answer, only silence, broken by the faint rustle of the dry grass and the pounding of her heart. She thought back to the first time she had seen him, standing tall with the sun casting firelight across his face. There had been something unshakable about him, something that made her both afraid and fascinated. He was not like anyone she had ever known, and perhaps that was why she could not stay away. Every meeting had been a risk, every glance a secret. And yet, the more they tried to resist, the stronger their bond had grown. Now, standing before him, she realized that the question she asked was not just about love, it was about survival. Because if his love was true, it meant they would have to fight for it. Against her family, against his people's warnings, against the forces that sought to keep them apart. And if his love was not true, then she would be left with nothing but broken pieces of her heart. The sun dipped lower, and shadows stretched across the land. Time seemed to slow as they stood there, two souls suspended between what was and what might be. His smile remained calm and steady, but there was something behind it, something unspoken, as if he knew the path ahead would not be gentle. She wanted to believe his words, to let herself be carried by the promise of love stronger than fear, stronger than life itself. But belief was dangerous, and love, when tested, could break even the strongest hearts. The silence pressed in around them, and for a moment it felt as though the world itself waited for her reply. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. A hawk cried above, circling in the fading sky, its call sharp and haunting. She shivered, sensing that the desert was warning them. That fate itself had begun to turn its gaze upon their love. And so, she stood there, torn between surrender and doubt, her question hanging in the air, his answer lingering like a vow. Between them stretched a future filled with both promise and peril, one that neither could escape. For in that moment, they both knew something greater than themselves was at work, something that would either bind them forever or tear them apart. The Apache reached out, brushing his fingers against hers, a touch both gentle and unyielding. "Do not fear," he whispered, though his eyes betrayed the weight he carried inside. She wanted to trust him, to step into his world with no thought of what she might lose. But fear clung to her like a shadow, whispering of dangers yet unseen. The desert wind rose, carrying with it the scent of dust and sage, wrapping them in its restless song. And there, under the fading light, with her heart trembling in her chest and his vow echoing in her ears, she realized the choice before her was no longer simple. To love him was to risk everything. To walk away was to lose the only thing that had ever felt real. But before she could decide, before the words she longed to speak could form, a sound broke through the stillness, a sound that promised their story was only beginning. And in that instant, the world shifted, leaving their love suspended on the edge of what was to come. The sharp sound that broke the desert's silence lingered in the air, unsettling her heart. It could have been the crack of a branch or the distant call of another voice carried on the wind, but whatever it was, it reminded them both that they were not alone in the world. Danger always lurked just beyond their fragile moments of peace, ready to tear them apart. She froze, eyes darting toward the horizon, but he remained still, his gaze steady, as though he had long since grown accustomed to the nearness of shadows. For him, the land was alive, filled with unseen eyes and unspoken warnings. He had grown under the endless sky, taught to read the language of silence and the meaning in the wind. For her, the stillness was suffocating, making her wonder who might be watching, what they might think, and how soon their secret could be discovered. The fear that lived within her chest was not only of being caught, but of losing him, of seeing this fragile bond destroyed by forces far beyond her control. She remembered how this had all begun, how fate had drawn her into his world almost without her realizing it. She had grown up surrounded by walls of rules, walls of tradition, walls that told her what her future should look like. Yet none of it had ever felt alive to her. The life she was promised was one of comfort, yes, but it was also a cage, and she had felt it pressing in tighter with each passing year. The first time she had stepped beyond the familiar and into the desert's expanse, she had felt a freedom she had never known. That was where she had seen him, standing against the horizon like a figure carved from the earth itself. At first, she had been afraid, unsure of what he might do, uncertain of who he was. His people were spoken of with both fear and suspicion where she came from, yet in his eyes she saw neither hostility nor coldness. Instead, she saw strength tempered with patience, a calm that unsettled her because it revealed how much she had never known. That moment had lingered in her mind long after she returned home, and no matter how she tried, she could not erase the memory of him. Their paths crossed again, not by accident, but by the pull of something neither could name. Each meeting was filled with risk, yet each time the risk felt worth it. She learned that he carried not only the pride of his people, but also the weight of loss. He did not speak of it often, but she could sense it in his silences, in the way his gaze drifted sometimes toward the distant hills, as if remembering something that could never return. For him, love had not been part of the plan. His life was shaped by duty, by loyalty to his people and their survival. Yet here she was, a part of a world so different, and yet she had become impossible to ignore. Her voice, her presence, unsettled the walls he had built inside himself. With her, the world seemed less harsh, less burdened by the endless struggles he had always known. But he also knew that their bond would not be welcomed. To others, she was an outsider, someone who did not belong in their world. And to her family, he was a danger, someone they would never accept. This truth was the storm building on the horizon of their love, and both could feel it drawing closer. Even now, as the shadows deepened around them, the reality pressed closer, whispering that time was short. She tightened her grip on his hand, though her voice shook when she finally spoke. "Do you ever wonder if it's possible? If we can really—" She stopped, unable to finish the thought, afraid that speaking it aloud might shatter everything. His smile remained, soft but unyielding. "The earth does not ask if the rain will come. It waits. It endures. We must be the same." His words gave her a strange comfort, yet they also carried a weight. To endure meant to suffer. To wait meant to risk losing what little they had. Love was not a gentle thing for them. It was a battle against the world, and neither knew how much strength they truly had to fight it. The sound returned, clearer this time, breaking their quiet moment. It was the distant thud of hooves, the rhythm of riders moving across the land. He stiffened, listening with sharp focus, his warrior's instincts rising to the surface. She held her breath, glancing toward the horizon where the last streaks of light painted the earth in fading gold. "Who is it?" she whispered. "Not friends," he answered simply, his voice low. Fear twisted inside her, but there was no time to ask more. He guided her quickly away from the open ground, leading her toward the shadows of a rocky outcrop. They moved swiftly, silent as the wind, but her heart thundered in her chest. Every step she took beside him reminded her of how fragile this was, how easily everything could be taken from them. As they crouched in the shadows, she pressed herself against the stone, feeling its cool surface against her back. He peered beyond the rocks, his eyes sharp, his body tense. The riders passed in the distance, their outlines dark against the fading horizon. She could not make out their faces, but the way they moved told her enough. They were searching. She reached for his arm, her voice a whisper carried on the trembling of her lips. "Are they looking for you?" "For us," he replied. The words cut deep. "For us." That meant their secret was no longer safe, that others had already sensed what bound them together. The thought chilled her, for she knew what it meant. To be found together was to risk everything: the wrath of her people, the judgment of his, the destruction of the fragile bond they had tried to protect. Her mind swirled with fear and doubt, but she clung to his presence. His calm steadied her, even when the unknown loomed large. Still, the questions gnawed at her. How long could they run? How long could they hide? How long before the weight of the world broke them apart? The riders disappeared into the distance, their sound fading into the silence of the desert. Yet the danger did not vanish with them. It lingered, heavy and unspoken, a reminder that their love was no longer just theirs. He turned to her then, his eyes meeting hers in the dim light. "You must decide," he said quietly. "This path is not easy. If you choose it, there is no turning back." Her lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to tell him that she had already chosen, that her heart had chosen him long ago. Yet the fear clung to her, holding her still. She could feel the weight of all that would be lost: her family, her safety, the life she had known. And yet, none of it seemed to matter as much as the thought of losing him. The desert night began to fall, stars piercing the dark sky one by one. Around them, The world seemed vast and endless, yet their hearts carried a closeness that defied the distance. She felt the pull of destiny in that moment, as if the universe itself had conspired to bring them together. But destiny, she knew, was not always kind. As the first chill of night settled in, she leaned closer, her whisper breaking the silence. "I'm afraid." His hand brushed against hers, firm and steady. "So am I," he admitted. It was the first time she had heard him confess such a thing, and it made her heart ache. Fear was not something he showed easily, and the fact that he shared it with her meant everything. Yet it also deepened the tension, for if even he feared what lay ahead, then the storm they faced must be greater than she dared to imagine. The night grew darker, the silence heavier, and somewhere in the distance, another sound stirred, a reminder that the danger was not gone, only waiting. And as they sat together in the shadows, bound by love and fear alike, the unanswered questions loomed larger than ever, pulling them deeper into a story that was only just beginning. The night stretched long, and though the riders had passed, the unease clung to them like a second skin. She could not sleep, even as the stars glittered in the dark sky above. Every sound seemed sharper, every shadow deeper. She sat close to him, watching the faint glow of the fire he had lit between the rocks. Its light flickered against his face, carving out the angles of a man born from the earth itself. He looked calm, but she could see the storm behind his eyes. Her thoughts drifted to the life she had left behind, to the home where her absence would not go unnoticed. She imagined her family speaking in worried tones, voices tinged with suspicion, wondering where she had gone. They would never understand this. To them, he was a danger, a reminder of stories told to frighten children into obedience. To her, he was the only thing that felt real, the only truth in a world built on false promises. Yet she knew their fear would soon turn into action, and once it did, there would be no turning back. He, too, carried the weight of those who would not forgive him. Among his people, honor was everything, and loyalty to the tribe was not a choice but a law. His elders would never accept her. They would see her as a threat, a weakness that could unravel all they fought to protect. He had not spoken of it much, but she knew he risked exile, even betrayal, if their love was discovered. The thought gnawed at her heart, for she could not bear the idea of him losing everything because of her. But love was not simple. It was a fire that had already taken hold, one that refused to be smothered. No matter how the world tried. She broke the silence, her voice low. "If they come for us, what will we do?" His eyes flickered toward her, steady, unwavering. "We stand. We fight. We endure." The words gave her strength, but they also frightened her. To fight meant blood. To endure meant sacrifice. Was love strong enough to survive what was coming? Or would it become the very thing that destroyed them both? Beyond the conflict of their hearts, the land itself seemed to carry secrets. The riders they had seen were not only searching for them, he believed, but for something greater. There had been whispers among his people of outsiders moving deeper into the land, seeking control of what they did not understand. The desert was more than a stretch of sand and stone. It was sacred, alive with the spirits of those who had walked it before. To desecrate it was to awaken forces that should not be disturbed. This added another layer to their struggle. Their love was not only a danger to themselves, but tangled within the growing tension between her world and his. She began to wonder if their bond was a thread in a much larger web, one that might bring more than just heartbreak. It might bring war. As dawn approached, he rose, scanning the horizon with sharp eyes. "We cannot stay here," he said. "The riders will return. They always return." She followed, her body weary but her spirit restless. Together they moved deeper into the wilderness, where the land grew harsher and the silence heavier. Along the way, she began to notice how he read the world around them, the bend of a blade of grass, the tracks in the dust, the call of a bird overhead. To her it was mystery, but to him it was language, one that told him where danger lay and where safety might be found out as the sun climbed higher. They came upon a stream hidden between cliffs, its waters cool and clear. She knelt to drink, and for a brief moment she felt peace. But peace never lingered. He crouched nearby, eyes fixed on something in the distance. When she followed his gaze, she saw the faint outline of smoke rising against the horizon. Her chest tightened. "Is it them?" He nodded slowly. "It is not far." Fear gripped her again, but this time it was mixed with something else, a question she could not escape. If they were discovered, would he choose her? Or would he be forced to choose the duty that bound him to his people? The conflict deepened, twisting between them. She wanted to ask him, wanted to hear him say that nothing could pull them apart. Yet she feared the answer, feared the truth might not be the one her heart needed. So instead she stayed quiet, the silence between them louder than words. Later, when they found shelter beneath a cluster of trees, he finally spoke. "There will come a time when they will demand my choice." His voice was steady, but the shadow in his eyes betrayed him. "And when that time comes, it will not be easy." Her breath caught. She had long known this truth, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. She looked at him, her voice breaking. "And if they ask you to turn from me?" He met her gaze, holding it with a strength that nearly brought her to tears. "Then they will know that love is stronger than their laws." The words should have comforted her, but instead they only deepened the weight pressing against her chest. Because strength alone could not erase the danger. His defiance would cost him dearly. And she began to realize that no matter how much they loved one another, the world around them was closing in. As the day passed, new fears rose in her mind. Perhaps it was not only the riders who threatened them. Perhaps it was the whispers within her own family, the suspicious looks, the tightening rules. She remembered overhearing a conversation once, hushed but sharp, about how nothing good ever came from stepping beyond the boundaries set for them. Now she wondered if they already knew of her secret, if plans were being made to bring her back, to lock her away before she could escape entirely. She thought of the walls of her home, the cold looks of those who judged her every step. Returning meant safety in their eyes, but to her it meant a prison. Out here with him, even in danger, she felt alive. But how long could that feeling last when the world around them was determined to tear it away? That night, as the fire burned low, she lay awake, staring at the stars. He sat nearby, silent, his knife glinting faintly in the firelight as he sharpened its edge. The sound was steady, almost soothing, yet it carried a warning. Every strike of the blade against stone was a reminder that they lived on borrowed time. She wanted to reach for him, to tell him her heart would never turn, no matter what came. But the words remained trapped inside, tangled in fear. For love was no longer just between them. It was entangled in loyalty, in family, in the restless movements of riders and whispers of war. And with every passing moment, the storm grew nearer. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, its cry carrying through the desert night. She shivered, her heart beating faster, knowing the sound was more than just the voice of the wild. It was an omen, a reminder that the darkness was not done with them yet, and as the fire's glow dimmed, and the shadows stretched longer around them, both of them knew that the hardest battles had not yet begun. Their love was a flame in the wind, burning bright but fragile, and the night seemed determined to test how long it could survive. The fire had long since died, leaving only faint embers glowing in the sand. The night wrapped around them like a shroud, heavy and unforgiving. She lay awake, every sense on edge, while he sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the darkness. There was something in the air, a stillness too deep, too unnatural. Even the desert creatures seemed to hold their breath, as though the land itself was waiting for something to break. At first, she thought it was only her imagination, the weight of fear playing tricks on her. But then she saw the way his hand tightened on the hilt of his knife, the way his body shifted slightly, ready to move at the first sound. Her chest tightened. He had heard something. She followed his gaze into the darkness but saw nothing, only the endless night stretching across the horizon. Then it came, the faint crunch of footsteps on stone, distant but steady. Not the wild, erratic sound of animals, but deliberate, human. Her heart pounded in her chest. The riders had returned. They had found them. He rose silently, pulling her to her feet. His touch was firm, urgent, yet calm. He led her deeper into the shadows of the rocks, every movement quiet, every step chosen with care. She tried to steady her breathing, but fear clawed at her throat. The footsteps grew closer, joined by low voices, carried just enough by the wind for her to hear. They were searching, calling to one another in clipped tones, their words sharp like blades. She pressed against the cold stone, listening as the voices drew nearer. Every instinct in her screamed to run, but his hand held hers tightly, a silent command to stay. His calm steadied her, but only just. The danger was so close she could almost feel it pressing against her skin. The voices passed, fading briefly into the distance, and she allowed herself a breath of relief. But it was short-lived. A sudden shout split the silence, loud and certain. They had found the remnants of the fire. Their trail was no longer hidden. His eyes met hers in the dim starlight, and in them she saw both resolve and sorrow. "We must move now," he whispered. The next hours blurred into a frantic rush through the wilderness. The moon lit their path only faintly, forcing them to trust instinct over sight. He guided her swiftly, his knowledge of the land their only advantage. Behind them, the shouts grew louder, the riders pushing harder, closing the distance. She stumbled, but each time his hand pulled her up, urging her forward. There was no time for weakness, no room for hesitation. Her body ached, her lungs burned, but fear drove her onward. She could hear the hooves now, pounding against the earth, shaking the ground beneath her feet. The sound grew louder, closer, relentless. The riders were not going to stop until they were caught. Finally, he led her toward a narrow canyon, its walls rising high on either side. The space was tight, forcing them into shadows, but it gave them cover. They pressed against the stone, hidden in the darkness as the riders thundered past above. She clung to him, her heart racing, praying they would not be seen, but fate was merciless. One rider slowed, his sharp eyes scanning the rocks. His voice rang out, calling the others. Torches flared in the night, their flames casting wild shadows across the canyon walls. She felt her heart seize. They had been found. The Apache warrior stepped forward, his body a shield between her and the approaching danger. His eyes burned with determination, his knife gleaming faintly in the torchlight. "Stay behind me," he told her, his voice steady despite the chaos closing in. She wanted to cry out, to beg him not to fight, but the words would not come. Fear and love tangled in her throat, leaving her silent. She could only watch as the riders dismounted, their figures dark and menacing against the firelight. One of them spoke, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Give her up. She does not belong to you." The words cut through the night, sharp and cold. She felt his hand tighten around hers one last time before he stepped forward. "She is mine," he answered, his voice like stone. "And I will not let her go." The tension hung heavy, every heartbeat stretching the moment thinner and thinner. The riders shifted, their weapons glinting. The canyon seemed to close in around them, the shadows pressing tighter, the night suffocating. She could feel the storm breaking, the clash inevitable, the world about to shatter. Her pulse roared in her ears as she clung to the stone, torn between fear and faith. The man she loved stood alone against the darkness, his figure lit by fire and shadow. The riders moved closer, their torches casting wild, flickering light, their weapons raised. And in that breathless moment, when every choice carried the weight of life and death, she knew the story of their love had reached its breaking point. The air trembled with the tension of what was to come, and though she wanted to scream, to stop it, to change it, the night only pressed deeper. The canyon echoed with the sound of steel being drawn, voices shouting, and the relentless rhythm of approaching danger. Everything they had run from was here, surrounding them, demanding an end. And just as the clash seemed ready to explode, the world froze on the edge of chaos, leaving their love, their fate, and their very lives hanging in the balance. The canyon held its breath. Torches crackled, steel gleamed, and every heart beat like a drum against the silence. For a moment, it seemed the world itself had paused, waiting for one strike, one sound, to unleash the storm. Then the clash erupted. The riders surged forward, their voices sharp, their weapons flashing in the torchlight. He met them head-on, fierce and unyielding, his body moving with the fluid strength of one who knew every inch of this land. She pressed herself against the canyon wall, her heart tearing in two as she watched the man she loved fight against the darkness closing. In it felt endless, the ring of steel, the echo of shouts, the rush of hooves above. Each second stretched thin, balanced on the edge of despair. She wanted to scream, to run into the chaos, but fear anchored her still. Yet even in her terror, she saw it his courage, his defiance, his love burning brighter than the fire that surrounded them. When the dust finally settled, silence returned to the canyon. The riders, bloodied and broken in spirit, retreated into the night, their torches fading into nothing. She stumbled forward, trembling, her eyes searching desperately for him. He stood battered but unbroken, his chest rising and falling with heavy breath, his knife still clenched in his hand. Relief flooded her, so strong it nearly brought her to her knees. She reached him, her hands shaking as they touched his face, tracing the dirt and sweat that streaked his skin. Tears spilled from her eyes, but her voice was steady. "You're here. You're still here." He drew her close, his arms wrapping around her, steady and sure. "I told you," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "I will not let you go." But even as she clung to him, the truth pressed down upon them. The fight had been won, but the war was not over. The riders would return. Her family would not stop searching. His people would not forgive the path he had chosen. The world was still against them, heavy with judgment and fear. They knew they could not remain in the canyon. At dawn, they moved together across the desert, weary but determined. The land stretched before them, endless and uncertain, yet it also held the promise of freedom. For the first time, she felt they were no longer running from something, they were running towards something new. Along the way, memories returned to her, moments of laughter and stolen glances, the first touch of his hand against hers. She thought of the girl she had once been, trapped within walls built by others, and realized she had left her behind. Here, in the wide-open silence of the desert, she was someone else, someone braver, someone freer, someone who had chosen love over fear. He, too, carried memories, the weight of his people's expectations, the voices of elders long gone. But as he walked beside her, he felt those voices grow softer, replaced by something stronger. He had chosen not just for himself, but for the life they could build together. The path ahead would not be easy, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. Days passed, the desert both testing and guiding them. They found shelter beneath cliffs, drank from hidden streams, and rested beneath the stars that seemed brighter each night. Though danger lingered, the bond between them grew stronger, each moment deepening the love that had once been only a fragile spark. Still, the question hung in the air: how long could they endure? Each glance behind reminded them that the past was not far behind, that shadows still pursued them. But each step forward told them something else, that the future belonged to those brave enough to claim it. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky with fire, they paused on a ridge overlooking the endless horizon. The wind carried the scent of sage and the faint cry of a hawk overhead. She leaned into him, her hand slipping into his, her voice quiet but firm. "Whatever comes, we face it together." He looked at her, his eyes steady, filled with both strength and tenderness. "More than life itself," he replied, the words carrying the same weight as when he first spoke them. And in that moment, standing against the vastness of the desert, they knew their story had not been about fear or running or even survival. It had been about choice, the choice to love despite the odds, to fight for a bond stronger than walls, laws, or the voices that sought to silence them. The conflicts of family, of tribe, of tradition would not vanish overnight. The writers would not forget. The world would still whisper against them. But love had already carried them through fire and darkness, and it would carry them still. As night fell, stars scattered like diamonds across the sky. They sat together in the silence, their hearts beating in rhythm with the earth itself. For the first time, the future did not frighten her. It was unknown, yes, but it was theirs. And so their journey continued, not in secret or in fear, but with the quiet strength of two souls bound together by something greater than the world's judgment. Their love, fragile yet unyielding, had survived the storm. It would endure the desert, the whispers, the shadows, because love, true love, was not about what the world allowed. It was about what the heart chose. And theirs had chosen long ago to stand together. That choice would be their legacy, their story, their truth. A truth whispered in the wind, written in the stars, carried forever in the heart of the desert. And though the world might forget the battles fought in silence, the canyon echoes, the firelight promises, and the whispered vows, their love would remain timeless, unbroken, and more than life itself.